One of the key themes in Philip K. Dick's Ubik, which is kind of a mystery to be solved until close to the end of the novel, is this decay and obsolescence and breakdown that's going on, a reversion of things to earlier times, kind of like a rotting. And in the case of some material objects, it almost seems like less of going backwards and going forward into less and less real or good versions of themselves. So we have some interesting movements, we could say, in time, and it's going to turn out to be not in objective time, but in subjective time, because as we find out, it's actually happening to the people who are in half-life. And it begins early on before they know that they're in half-life, when they think that they're getting Runsiter himself into half-life after the attack, the explosion. Runsiter's been killed. They get him into cold pack. And we find out that this is at the very end of chapter 6. Joe gets out a cigarette and lights it. The cigarette, dry and stale, broke apart as he tried to hold it between his fingers. Strange, he thought. The bomb blast, Al Hammond said, noticing the heat. Wendy says, did it age us? I feel old. I am old. Your packet of cigarettes is old. We're all old as of today because of what has happened. This is a day for us like no other. And at that point, they don't think that much of it other than Wendy's being a little dramatic. But very soon, in the next chapter, we see that they get out a phone book. Now, we don't use phone books anymore, but in Philip K. Dick's imagination of the future, we're still using phone books, and we find out that it's a brand new ship that they're on, but the phone book itself is a little bit obsolete. They examine the information on the back of it, and it turns out it's 2 years old. And Eddie Doran says, well, that can't be. This ship didn't exist 2 years ago. Everything on it and in it is all new. And Tito says, well, maybe Runsiter cut a few corners. And Eddie says, no, he lavished care, money, and engineering skill on pratfall too. This ship is his pride and joy. So they're trying to figure out what's going on with that. And the mystery is, you could say, kind of spreading. The next thing that is going to happen has to do with cream for coffee. So they're at the beloved Brethren Moratorium in Zurich, and they go to an automat, and they say, charge the account to the of Glenn Runsiter of Runsiter Associates, and they say, insert the proper credit card. And so anyway, there's an exchange between Joe and the machine. He wants some coffee. And Joe gets the pitcher of coffee, and he says, look at this cream. The fluid plastered the sides in dense clots. This is what you get for a postcredit in one of the most modern, technologically advanced cities on Earth. I'm not leaving here until this place makes an adjustment, either returning my postcredit or giving me a replacement pitcher of fresh cream so I can drink my coffee. And now they're thinking about it. Al Hammond says, what's the matter, Joe? And Joe says, first my cigarette, then the 2-year-old obsolete phone book in the ship, and now they're serving me week-old sour cream. I don't get it, Al. And Al says, just drink the coffee, Black. He picks up the coffee cup, and he finds the coffee cold, inert, and ancient. A scummy mold covered the surface. And he says, what's going on, he thought. What's happening to me? His revulsion became all at once a weird, nebulous panic, right? And they're starting to think maybe it has something to do with Pat Connolly, right? And they go on a little bit further, and we're going to find out that it's not just things like cigarettes or cream or coffee. It also has to do with coins and even bills. So Al is going to leave Joe with a bunch of bills that are very close to being unacceptable. They're old bills, but the coins cannot be used. He puts a quarter into a phone, and the phone says, "I'm sorry, sir, but I can't accept obsolete money." The quarter chattered out of the bottom of the phone and landed at his feet, expelled in disgust. "What do you mean?" he said, stooping awkwardly to retrieve the coin. "Since when is a North American Confederation quarter obsolete?" "I'm sorry, sir," the phone said. "The coin you put into me was not a North American Confederation quarter, but a recalled issue of the United States of America's Philadelphia Mint. It's of merely numismatical interest." Now, for collectors, right? So he sees that the coin is 40 years old and long ago recalled. And, they trade him some money so he can actually get by. But this could be a problem, right? And then a little bit later in chapter 8, they're going to start noticing kind of a common thread going on here. Now, this involves finding a person who has devolved, who has become just a husk, reverted to something else. And we read here, so Joe says, "My cigarettes dried out, the 2-year-old phone book of the ship, the soured cream and coffee with scum on it, mold on it, the antiquated money. What's the common thread? Age." She said that back on Luna after we made it to the ship. She said, "I feel old." He pondered, trying to control his fear. It had begun now to turn to terror. What does it mean? He's trying to figure out the link between these occurrences, and a little bit later on, he writes them down in a list, and he says, what is the common link between these occurrences, these 5 things that are wrong? And they're not able to determine it. Now, it starts to, we might say, escalate as we have more and more interesting manifestations. So Al actually goes and gets a tape recorder, and he pays money for it, gets it in a new box, but what's the case? Al says, "I think I know what we'll find, and it's something we can't test out here." So they go to Runseter Associates, they turn over the tape recorder to the firm's shop, and here's what the workman says. He says, "All the moving parts in the tape transport stage are worn. The rubber drive tire has flat spots on it. Pieces of rubber are all over the insides. The brakes are high speed. Wind and rewind are virtually gone. It needs cleaning and lubricating throughout. It's seen plenty of use. In fact, I would say it needs a complete overhaul, including new belts." Al said, "Several years of use? Possibly. How long have you had it?" "I bought it today," Al said. "That isn't possible," the shop foreman said. "Or if you did, they sold you." "Oh, I know what they sold me," Al said. "I knew when I got it before I opened the carton." To Joe, he said, "A brand new tape recorder, completely worn out. Bought with funny money that the store is willing to accept. Worthless money, worthless article purchased." It has a sort of logic to it. And then the shop foreman says, "This is not my day. This morning when I got up, my parrot was dead." He says, "I don't know what, just dead, stiff as a board. I'll tell you something you don't know about your tape recorder. It's not just worn out, it's 40 years obsolete. They don't use rubber drive tires anymore, belt run transports. You'll never get parts for it unless somebody hand makes them. And it wouldn't be worth it. The damn thing is antiquated. Junk it. Forget about it." Now they start thinking, oh man, this is more than just decay. And they start realizing there's going to be some problems soon. So he says, "We're talking about something that's a different matter, and we're going to start to have trouble finding food anywhere of any kind. How much of the food sold in supermarkets would be good after that many years?" Joe says, "Well, the canned goods," and I saw a lot of canned goods in that supermarket in Baltimore. And Al says, "Well, we know why. 40 years ago, supermarkets sold a far greater proportion of their commodities in cans rather than frozen. That might be our sole source. You're right. But in one day, it's jumped from 2 years to 40 years. By this time tomorrow, it might be 100 years. And no food is edible 100 years after it's packaged, cans or otherwise." And he says, "It's not just us. That old woman in Baltimore, it's affecting what she bought too, her azalea. Is the whole world going to starve because of a bomb blast on Luna? Why is everybody involved instead of just us? And then they suggest something quite interesting, a little bit of foreshadowing. Al says, I have to think of something. Maybe Baltimore is only there when one of us goes there, and the Lucky People supermarket, as soon as we left, it passed out of existence. It could be that it's only us who are on Luna that are really experiencing it. And Joe says, well, that's a philosophical problem of no importance or meaning, incapable of being proved one way or the other, right? And so, they close there. And then in chapter 9, they discover something else. They go to the elevator, and Joe doesn't see this, but Al does see it. The elevator arrived clatteringly. The racket awoke Al from his introspection. He pushed aside the iron grill safety door and found himself facing an open cage with polished brass fittings suspended from a cable. A dull-eyed, uniformed operator sat on a stool working the handle. He gazed at us with indifference. Don't get in, he said to Joe, holding him back. Look at it and think. Try to remember the elevator we rode in earlier today. The hydraulic-powered, closed, self-operated, absolutely silenced. Why did he stop talking then? Because the elderly clanking contraption had dimmed, and in its place the familiar elevator resumed its existence. Yet he sensed the presence of the other, older elevator. It lurked at the periphery of his vision, as if ready to ebb forward as soon as he and Joe turned their attention away. It wants to come back, he realized. It intends to come back. We can delay it temporarily, a few hours possibly at the most. The momentum of the retrograde force is increasing. Archaic forms are moving towards domination more rapidly than we thought. It's now a question of 100 years at one swing. The elevator we just saw must have been a century old. And yet, he thought, we seem to be able to exert some control over it. We did force the actual contemporary elevator back into being. If all of us stay together, if we function as an entity of not 2 but 12 minds, right? So what does this actually suggest as he explains it to Joe? Our perceptions are beginning to differ. And he wondered what it meant. In its dire, obscure way, it seemed to him potentially the most deadly change since Runsiter's death. They were no longer regressing at the same rate, and he had an acute, intuitive intimation that Wendy Wright had experienced exactly this before her death. So their perceptions now are differing. Reality is kind of changing. Joe will experience something similar when he goes back to his apartment, where the only thing that's still the same is his pain in the rear door who wants money from him. So we get this long description. The living room smelled faintly of burnt grease, an odor he'd not come across since childhood. His stove had reverted back to an ancient Buck natural gas model with clogged burners, an encrusted oven door which did not close entirely. The other kitchen appliances had undergone similar metamorphoses. The homeopath machine had vanished entirely. The toaster had dissolved sometime during the day and reformed itself as a rubbishy, quaint, non-automatic model. Not even pop-up, he discovered. The refrigerator was an enormous belt-driven model, a relic that had floated into being from God knew what distant past. It was even more obsolete than the turret-top GE shown in the TV commercial. The coffee pot had undergone the least change. As a matter of fact, in one respect, it had improved. It lacked a coin slot, operating toll-free. This aspect was true of all the appliances, he realized. All that remained, anyhow. Like the homeopath machine, the garbage disposal had entirely vanished. The TV set had receded back a long way. He found himself confronted by a dark wood cabinet Atwater Kent tuned radio frequency, old-time AM radio, complete with antenna and ground wires. And so he starts thinking to himself, why didn't the TV set revert to formless metals and plastics? Those were its constituents. It had been constructed out of them, not out of an earlier radio. And here we get a very interesting philosophical musing. Perhaps this weirdly verified a discarded ancient philosophy, that of Plato's ideal objects, the universals which in each class were real. The form TV set had been a template imposed as a successor to other templates, like the procession of frames in a movie sequence. Prior forms, he reflected, must carry on an invisible residual life in every object. The past is latent, is submerged, but still they are capable of rising to the surface once the latter imprinting, unfortunately, and against ordinary experience, vanished. The man contains not the boy, but earlier men, he thought. History began a long time ago. And then he thinks a little bit more, but didn't Plato think that something survived the decline, something inner not able to decay? The ancient dualism, body separated from soul? The body ending as Wendy did and the soul out of its nest, the bird flown elsewhere? Maybe that's the case, right? And he turns on the radio and starts getting old programs as well. And we find that, he has a car, but the car itself is very old, and so is the Ubik liver and kidney balm that he has, right? So he goes out and finds this museum piece car, and by the time that he drives it to another place and offers it as, you could say, collateral to the person who's going to fly him on a plane out to Des Moines, it has regressed to a fabric-top Ford coupe, a tinny and small car, very old, a black 1929 Model A Ford, nearly worthless. But the Ubik bottle has also regressed to something else. Seamless and flat with scratch marks on it, the kind of bottle made in a wooden mold. Very old indeed. The cap appeared to be handmade, and he's able to trade this to the guy. A soft tin screw type dating from the late 19th century, and the label had changed as well. Elixir of Ubik, guaranteed to restore lost manliness and to banish vapors of all known kinds, as well as to relieve reproductive complaints in both men and women. A beneficent aid to mankind when sedulously employed as indicated, right? Now, later on, it's going to get even worse. He gets together with the other people in Des Moines, and they're starting to think, well, what year is it? It turns out to be 1939, and they're trying to figure, how the hell did we end up in 1939? So Joe says, well, we haven't gone anywhere. We're where we've always been, but for some reason, reality has receded. It's lost its underlying support and ebbed back to previous forms it took 53 years ago. It may regress further. I'm more interested in knowing whether Runciter is showing himself to us or not. And they have to figure out what the hell is going on with all of this. And we do get an answer, but it's going to be coming much later on in chapter 15. Jory, the chief antagonist, a young man who has been in cold pack, in Half-Life, is preying on everybody and also constituting the world that they are experiencing, right? So we find out that Jory actually has eaten a lot of the other people, and he's been maintaining a phatasmagoric, as it's going to be called in chapter 16, world. And he says, Jory says, it's not very large, one hotel in Des Moines and a street outside the window with a few people in cars. And Joe asks him, you're not maintaining New York or Zurich? And he says, well, why would I? There's no one there. Wherever you and the others of the group went, I constructed a tangible reality corresponding to their minimal expectations. For example, when you flew across the countryside, I had to create all that countryside. And Joe says, well, why 1939? Why not our contemporary world of 1992? And Jory says, it's the effort. I can't keep objects from regressing. Doing it all alone, it was too much for me. I created 1992 at first, but then things began to break down, and we get an answer. The coins, the cream, the cigarettes, all those phenomena that you noticed, right? So Jory is revealing that the world that they're in is an imaginary, as we said, phatasmagoric counterpart of their own time. And then we read, decomposition back to these forms was not of his doing. They happened despite his efforts. They are natural atavisms, Joe realized, happening mechanically as Jory's strength wanes. Now, what is an atavism? Reverting back to a previous form. As the boy says, it's an enormous effort. But we do find that Jory is deliberately reverting things back when it comes to Ubik so that Joe won't actually be able to use it effectively. And Jory is taking different forms, including that of the pharmacist. However, Joe is able to get his hands on the spray can Ubik, and he's able to be saved as a result. The spray can, by the way, can also make things come back to life, which kind of ties in with all of the advertisements about Ubik that we're seeing there. So this is a really central theme, a kind of mystery, as we said at the beginning, that does get solved. And it's partly the effect of what Jory is doing, but also you could say what Jory can't do that's causing all of these reversions and moments of obsolescence and spoiling that are happening within the story.